And the government's kind of just left these manufacturers, with a shortfall.
You've gone from paying basically zero tax to, I think it was £620.
There's a lot of question marks here, and I think the consumer is ultimately unclear.
Hello and welcome to the Talk Auto podcast. I'm Ben.
And I'm Holly, and every month we're joined by industry experts to talk about all the latest in automotive. Now, this month we have a very relevant topic, don't we?
We do, we certainly do. We're going to be talking about the autumn budget and how that's going to affect the motor industry moving forward.
And we are joined by two fantastic guests. Thank you both for joining us. And so I'm delighted to introduce Furrukh Sheikh, who is the European Group Finance Director for Cox Automotive Europe, and also Zach Moodie, who is the Senior Research and Policy Officer at the NFDA. How are you both?
Yeah, doing great, thank you.
Yeah. Good, thank you.
Happy to be here,
Awesome.
Sure, yeah.
Good.
So just before we dive right in, it would be great just to get a really quick overview of your current role and kind of your journey within automotive and your industry. So Zach, should we start with you?
Sure, yeah. I work at NFDA. I've been there for about 3.5 years, as you mentioned, policy and research. Kind of stumbled into it, to be honest, but I've enjoyed it. It's been good. I lead the policy team there with all sorts of areas of policy, budget as we'll come up to, electric vehicles, all those sorts of things. I think my main responsibilities are probably responding to government consultations, what's developing those relationships, stuff like that. And just making sure that our members who are franchise dealers are being represented at that level. Yeah.
Amazing.
So I've been with Cox Automotive about 12 years now. So that's been my experience in the automotive industry. I joined originally in corporate development, so working on M&A and strategy and so on. And I moved into finance and sort of worked my way through that. So I've been Group Finance Director now for Cox Automotive Europe for the last couple of years.
Perfect.
Learned a lot in 12 years, I can say that.
Yeah.
I bet. I bet. It's a great company to work for in terms of, all the different aspects of automotive, isn't it?
There's always a lot going on.
Always. Now, I think before we kind of dive into the real nitty-gritty of the budget, obviously our listeners will probably be quite familiar with a lot of the points that were covered, but I think what would be great is just to kind of recap those points and kind of have the key takeaways of what the budget means for automotive. Furrukh, could you just kind of touch on some of those points?
Yeah, there's a lot there, isn't there? Let's be honest. There's a lot to unpack. I think probably the headlines are, and probably the most talked about point is the EV pence per mile, which kicks in from April 2028. So that's a 3 pence per mile levy for EVs and actually 1.5 pence for hybrids. So that's a major talking point, and obviously there's been a lot of press interest in that announcement. I think as well as that, there has been some positives. The ECOS scheme, so that's the employee car ownership scheme, there was concern that would actually be taxable from 2026. That's been pushed out to 2030, which I think gives us some relief. As well as that, it's been positive to see investment in EV as well. So the government are extending the grants on vehicles under 38k, which is around half of the EV vehicles on sale today. And as well, infrastructure investment, so about 200 million investment in things like chargers and so on. So I would say a mix of things. There's a lot in there.
Bag, isn't it? A little bit.
But really, I think the headline is actually EV adoption. How is that now impacted by this new levy, which I'm sure will be a talking point today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we've certainly got a point to touch on there. I guess, Zach, you were quite pivotal in your role, sort of consulting with the government on the proposed changes and stuff. Were there any wins in particular from your perspective? Anything that you feel that they sort of missed out on?
Yeah, I think the first one, I think was the first point on my submission, was the expensive car supplement. For those who don't know, you basically, if you're buying a car over £40,000, all of a sudden you've gone from paying basically zero tax to, I think it was £620. So we were like, big disincentive to buy a new electric car, either needs to get scrapped or just extend the threshold, because a lot of these electric cars are quite expensive at the moment.
Yeah, some people might know it as the luxury car tax.
Exactly, yeah. So that threshold got increased to 50,000, so we think that's quite positive. As most things with the government and the budgets, they'll give with one hand and they'll take away something else. But that was quite a big win for us, yeah.
Were there any places in the budget where you thought it kind of differed from your proposal that you submitted, or thought that they might have just missed out on?
I don't know about missed out on. We're still kind of waiting and a little bit confused on business rates. It's quite an important topic for a lot of our members. They've been told that there's going to be a consultation coming and that there's reform coming, and always has been kicked down the road. There has been some announcements on it, but I don't think it's quite what we want to see change just yet. There's quite a lot of concern that a lot of our members who had these big forecourts, big show car rooms, if their rateable value is above, I think it's like 500,000 or something.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so that's probably what we think's been a missed opportunity really so far. That's something that I think our members would like to see change. So going forward, that's probably the one that we'll have to try.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's fantastic having you on the podcast, because submitting that kind of document to government and seeing kind of what points they've drawn out, what they've either missed or kind of missed the mark on, it's so interesting to have your input. I guess from also kind of like a fleet perspective, Furrukh, the day before the budget, they also released Motability changes, didn't they? So that included restricting the type of vehicles
That's right.
that were available, particularly those luxury models.
That's right, yeah.
So from a fleet perspective, what does, I guess, that Motability announcement and the budget mean for fleets?
Yeah. I mean, again, I actually think there's a few positives. I think the ECOS scheme being pushed out, to 2030 gives the fleet cos a level of security in terms of supply. I think one interesting point, which is quite subtle actually, is that the benefit in kind rate today for hybrid vehicles is actually quite high, and it has increased over time. They've actually brought that back down, so there's going to be an easement on that till 2028. So I think they're good points. Salary sacrifice, huge for the fleet cos, and that's a big supply of vehicles into the industry. Company car drivers and so on take that option because it's very tax efficient. So luckily we weren't impacted by that through this announcement, which I think is great. But I think more broadly, what's going to happen to new car sales, what's going to happen to EV adoption, that's going to be a key point, because let's remember about 60% of new cars go through the fleet channel. So again, a mixed bag, some positives, but as well, some uncertainty.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting from a manufacturer point of view, isn't it, as well, because obviously we've touched on that really big talking point, that EV pay per mile. And kind of, obviously, the policy there is 3 pence per mile for an EV. But the knock-on effect that the OBR suggests that that's going to have on EV sales is a reduction in 440,000 EVs.
Yeah.
Now, and obviously, these manufacturers have ZEV mandates they've got to hit. We've had no change to those mandates. And the government's kind of just left these manufacturers, with a shortfall of thousands of vehicles and no way to really make that back up. So it's raised a lot of kind of questions in the industry. What do you think that impact is going to be on manufacturers from a manufacturer point of view?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I think, this year they've got to get to 28% of their new car sales as full EV. I think they're tracking about 25. And I think what we see in the market today is quite a lot of discounting as well. Yes. On some of those new vehicles. So actually their profitability is probably impacted by that. I think in 2028 it's got to get to 52%, and then by 2030, 80%. So they've got a real steep hill to climb. And let's remember, actually, for every vehicle they're behind, it's a £12,000 penalty. So they have that really steep target ahead of them. And then in the backdrop, there was already, in my view, uncertainty from a consumer perspective around EV adoption because of things like range anxiety and charging and all that stuff. Residual values is another key point.
Huge, yeah.
And now we have this additional kind of concern, if you like, with this pence per mile, not just the cost of it, but actually how are they going to manage it as well. So I think it'll be interesting from your perspective as well as that from a dealer perspective. But the OEMs, from my point of view, have got the challenge now of getting more EVs into the market, but with the backdrop of more consumer uncertainty. I think as well, rationing of sort of ICE vehicles is happening. And therefore, they're going to probably push the price up of those sort of traditional ICE vehicles, which is going to impact the consumer as well. So, yeah, it's a challenging time, and they've got a lot to do.
That's it, isn't it? It's figuring out what that threshold is between actually, as an OEM, we're going to have to massively reduce the number of ICE and or hybrid vehicles that we're producing and selling into the market. So that the EVs are actually sort of adopting at the rates that are needed.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we know it's a positive thing in the fleet space, and because of the company car benefits, and it's good for employees through salary sacrifice schemes. But actually, for a consumer to go and buy an EV, take that risk on residual values, it's a big challenge, isn't it? And then, of course, let's remember 1 in 3 drivers in the UK doesn't have access to a driveway. So then you do the maths on actually what's the cost of ownership when you're paying 70 pence per kilowatt hour at a charger versus 6 pence at home. There's a lot of question marks here, and I think the consumer is ultimately unclear, and that's going to be a major challenge.
Absolutely. And Zach, I guess from your perspective, from a franchise dealer perspective, what impact is that policy going to have on kind of the vehicles that are being sold, the consumer appetite for EVs?
Yeah, you touched on it slightly where they might restrict some vehicles. We're quite worried that like Europe, who's like our biggest trading partner, obviously, are like I think they're reviewing their 2035 deadline at some point this year. So there's a little pushback there. I know like some manufacturers are scaling back their ambitions a little bit. I know to name even BYD, quite good electric. They're starting to make hybrids in some of their places. So there's a little concern about that. And then the manufacturers will be like, there'll be a lot of pressure on dealers to hit those ZEV mandate targets. And pay per mile is just another big disincentive to the consumer. It will probably, disincentivize it. On the other side, I kind of think like the government don't really have much choice. It kind of had to get addressed at some point. Maybe it was the wrong time. Maybe the plan itself could be more thought out. But it's always going to be a very unpopular thing to bring in. But it's kind of like, I kind of get why they're doing it long term. Short term, maybe not great. But yeah, I think that's why they focused on extending the car grant as well. You know, we lobbied for a direct incentive for a long time. Just like you can't all be all stick, you know, with the ZEV mandate targets. There needs to be some sort of carrot as well. I still think the car grant itself is a little too restrictive. I think there's like 4 cars now that only get the full grant.
Yeah, it's not many.
So like, so great for those brands, I suppose. But in terms of like what really happened is that a consumer would come to the dealership, they've seen the headline, I can get 3,750 off a car. And then the dealer's like, actually you can't. So that's just another kicking the can down the road for electric vehicle adoption, just kind of slowing it all down again. So
because I looked into that, and actually the criteria for the grant
it's strict.
It's quite tight.
I
think from like 40 to 50k means around half of the EV vehicles will technically qualify, but half of vehicles, EV new cars, are over 50k brand new. So it's helpful, isn't it? But it's actually not fundamental.
I think the rules were quite sort of unclear when they first came out as well. It was, a vehicle that started below 38,000, but actually if you had the same model but a slightly more expensive derivative that was 42,000 maybe, that was still eligible for the grant as well. So I think there's been a lot of consumer end user confusion around that. Zach, are you hearing anything directly from the retailers about how they're going to try and sort of challenge this? I've heard that a couple of OEMs are actually starting to discount their vehicles or add a finance contribution that matches the 3 pence a mile. So actually they're getting ahead of the curve, and they're actually implementing that sort of stuff now ahead of the 2028 deadline. Just wondering what the retailers are thinking of.
I'm not surprised. Like when the car grant itself got announced, a few of the OEMs did their own like offer straight away. I think like MG were quite ahead of the curve.
They were a big one.
Will do their own discounts and stuff. So like the industry's quite adaptable in that way, I suppose. I'm sure you guys are always very competitive. So any edge, that they can get, they'll go for it for sure. I
think you touched on an interesting point there as well, Ben. And Zach as well, in that the communication from government has not been fantastic, has it? And I mean, this is kind of a historical problem within our industry. But when they announced that tax, pay per mile tax, how it's going to be implemented has not been addressed. And there's a long way between now and 2028 when it's supposed to be. But we've seen in other countries, so Finland and New Zealand have similar-ish systems, and those are honesty-based. So, it's the citizens and the drivers that I've got to report them.
I don't think that would work here.
My question was, do you think that would work here? And if not, how do you could you feasibly see it being something that, are they going to ask EV drivers to go in even when they don't need an MOT to get their mileage reviewed? How are they going to police it?
Or like the little black boxes you get to lower your insurance.
Yeah.
That sort of thing, yeah.
What's kind of your take on that in terms of, from a consumer perspective, how's it going to affect almost those attitudes towards EVs? Maybe it's going to be more negative if you have to go in and do all this extra admin. And then EV adoption as well. Zach, it'd be really interesting to get your take.
That's a good question. I think, it's maybe the MOTs is the feasible. That's what I'd probably guess that you would do it when you're checking mileage. I know it's a lot easier nowadays. I think it's all digital. Cars have become more digital to track. I know there is still a few problems with like mileage fraud every now and again. But it's a great question. I don't know how they're going to do it. No. MOTs is the way I probably do it, because I think that's yearly as well.
Yeah,
so,
but then again you come into the problem of you don't need an MOT for the first
3 years.
Exactly. So
and there was lobbying, I think, at some point to extend it out so that you only to 2 or 4 years, for older vehicles as well.
And then you also have the issue of, where are you doing those miles?
Yeah.
Because if you're driving to France twice a year on a lovely family holiday or something, should you be paying for the tax?
Great question.
Yeah. But that counts, isn't it?
Yeah, well, exactly. So it's kind of, how are we going to address that policy?
Yeah.
Have you got any input?
I think yes, it's quite interesting. I think cars over 3 years, you do an MOT, that makes sense. You could log it there. I think obviously newer cars, it's going to be a challenge. I've read that there may be estimations that the consumer has to provide. So I think I'll do 5,000, and then when it's recorded, if it's less or more, they'll get sort of recompensed. Will there be more for telematics? More digitization with the car. Yeah. But again, the interest point you raised there was around like privacy as well. And does it become invasive when your car's being tracked or you've got a black box and so on? So again, it's back to the point of consumer uncertainty sort of rises with stuff like this. I think the other point is it'll probably cost quite a lot to administer and manage. And yes, there's going to be some receipts as a result of this, but as well, there's going to be, now, is that the OEM? Is that the dealer? I don't know, but somebody's going to have to manage that, right? And I think that needs thinking through.
Again, communication piece, isn't it? It's been not ideal throughout this entire drive towards EVs, and it continues to be, questionable. And I guess, for example, Cox Automotive just launched an EV hub on the website, which gives consumers, drivers, everyone some insight into education around EVs, how, for example, the budget will affect. And I think it's just that communication piece, which we've spoken to about a lot on this podcast, haven't we? Of who's the onus on? Is it on OEMs? Is it on retailers? Is it on automotive businesses like Cox? Where is that going to go? I guess obviously we've touched on a lot of the automotive policies within the budget. Is there any announcements that maybe have gone a little bit more under the radar that may affect the public, may also affect the industry that we're not focused on? For example, obviously the rise in minimum wage, that will have a knock-on effect to smaller and bigger automotive businesses. Yeah.
I mean, from my perspective, I was frankly nervous heading into this budget from our perspective as a business, and 4% increase in the minimum wage, which is lower than previous years. I think actually the biggest impact was last year with the increase in the NI. So I think that's a point. I think you touched on the business rates. That's a question and a concern. I think they've done some stuff around apprenticeships, which I think is really important and needed. So there is that. I think the broader backdrop, though, is more taxation for the consumer. If you think about, a big thing for me is the thresholds on tax. They've frozen that now to 2030 or 31. Yeah. So essentially the consumer will pay more tax. And then on salary sacrifice on pensions, that kicks in 29. So you're going to have to pay tax on that and on things like dividends and rental income. So I think more broadly, is consumer sentiment going to increase or reduce? I would argue it's probably likely to reduce. And economic growth is pretty flat as well. So what does that mean for our industry? I think it's going to create some challenges.
Yeah. Zach, it'd be great to have your input as well.
Yeah, I mean, I feel sorry. I do feel Rachel Reeves probably has the worst job in the world. I certainly wouldn't want it.
No.
They're kind of slightly confusing in the sense of like, they always talk about like growth is their objective. They need to grow the economy. And then you touched on it. They raise national insurance contributions. It's like, well, all of a sudden there's going to be a big freeze on hiring people. So it's still quite, I think they're also as a party, being torn between like, we need to fix the problems of the country, but then the left of their party is not really letting them get some of the big questions answered. I know they've tried a lot of like benefits reform and all this sort of stuff, but they just don't really seem to be able to make a firm decision either way. I heard rumours that he was going to try, and I guess Keir Starmer was going to try and address that again at some point. But it is a little confusing, yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot in one document, wasn't it? And a lot to kind of digest and impact on, a lot of segments of society and industry again. I think from just kind of going back to that, bringing it back to automotive and that EV stance, is that we've seen such a juxtaposition in this budget of trying to advance EVs and also reducing the customer appetite for them. And I think I know we've kind of touched on it already, but I think it's a really important point to address, because as an industry, we are really trying to promote that EV adoption. And, the best economies and the biggest minds have been at this for years. And it almost feels like a step backwards when we're introducing policies that, reduce that adoption and not, kind of matching the policies around that. So from, I guess, a consumer point of view, with EV adoption, how do we think that's going to, Zach, I'd be really interested to get your opinion on that in terms of from a dealership, but also a consumer perspective on how this budget affects kind of EV adoption? Yeah,
it's hard for a consumer because this is probably arguably the biggest change in the automotive industry's like history, the switch to electric. But for a consumer, it's also changing like your daily habits almost. So like you can't just roll up to a station, fill up the tank and leave. If you don't have a driveway, you're unlucky, I guess. There's no plan for that really. So I know people now that are like, they'll do their like Sainsbury's shop, and while they're shopping, they'll charge, or they'll just wait for a little bit. So it's like, I think you're trying to get the message across that like the world's not ending for cars. It's okay. Like, you're going to have, it might be a little bit awkward at first. But people I've spoken to, like the cars are quite good products at the end of the day.
They are, definitely.
I drive the EVs, so
they're good to drive. Like, it might be a little uncomfortable at first, but like you kind of get used to them. It's not terrible. So I think like if this is the road that the government's going down and that this is the future, then it's okay. I think my message to consumers would be to give it a try. If you don't like it, maybe buy a hybrid and hold on to that for a few more years.
That sort of middle ground, and I guess that sort of ties in nicely with some of the other stuff that the government did announce with, a couple £100 million that is going to go towards that charging infrastructure. Maybe that'll hopefully bring some of the costs down of those motorway service charges. Maybe it will help with people who are, struggling to charge at home, whether that's whacking in some new lampposts with EV chargers built in that I've seen a couple of places. Yeah. Is there anything that you guys can speak of around, maybe how that money could be best used?
I think for the charging, I would always be concerned if you live rurally. So I'm from like a tiny village in North Yorkshire. There's no way my parents can like really feasibly get an electric car. Like they could, if they got to their driveway, but like the infrastructure isn't there even on the street to hook up to. I don't know how it would work or what they'd have to do. So I think just making sure that it's not just a London-focused thing or city-focused thing, and that like if this is a transformation for the entire country, you need to make sure that everyone is taking with it. No one's left behind, really.
Yeah,
would probably be my argument, just to make sure that you're getting them in the right places as well. Yeah.
What about you, Furrukh? It's a big question. Where do we put the investment?
Yeah.
But
It's a big question. I think fundamentally, if you think about the difference between home charging and the sort of, the sort of fuel chargers, the difference is massive.
Yeah.
So, if you have a driveway and you live at home, you do the analysis of actually what's the cost of charging it versus, say, fuel in an ICE vehicle. There is a big difference. But actually, when you start blending in, I've got to stop off and charge at these really high rates, the gap sort of shortens. So I'm just curious as to how do you get more chargers around and how do you bring that cost down? Because it's not just the chargers, is it? It's the infrastructure below that, which is the biggest challenge for us. So I'll probably say that would be an interesting thing to look at.
Yeah, it's that infrastructure piece. It's really positive that we have the funding and we can see that it's a more of a priority for government. I guess completely switching gears now. And we very, very briefly, Furrukh, you touched on apprenticeships earlier.
Sure.
And I think it would be really, really interesting to kind of, for those who don't know, Furrukh, you started your career
That's right.
as an apprentice.
Yep.
And doing an apprenticeship. And this budget has seen some core changes to apprenticeship funding. And it'd be really interesting to kind of get your take on the additional funding announced and the impact that you think that's going to have both in the automotive industry and potentially beyond as well.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose a number of things in my mind. First of all, if you think about the automotive industry, let's start there. You know, since Brexit, there has been that sort of migration out of technical skilled workers. And actually the vehicle park is getting older because in COVID, you had this big production shortage. So the demand for servicing vehicles, after sales in particular, and we see it in our business in the wholesale space when we defleet and sort of refurb at scale, you know, skilled technical resource is really important. It's important for the whole ecosystem of the automotive industry. And it's a real gap, it's a real shortage today. And what does that mean? That means that cars are taking longer to get through the process, but as well for the consumer, actually it's more expensive because labour rates are going up, partly due to the taxation, partly due to the lack of supply. So I think longer term, this is pivotal. We've got to invest in those apprenticeships to get younger people into these jobs, get them trained up, because in the longer term, they're going to be really important for the industry. And I think particularly like dealerships, franchise dealers rely heavily on after sales. So, you know, and there's loads of vacancies out there, and it's not a case of pay necessarily. It's actually that resource is not there. So I think strategically for the long term, investing in that is super important. And I think more broadly, you know, things are more expensive now, aren't they, than say 5-10 years ago?
Absolutely.
We can all agree with that. And so if I think I'm a young person, do I choose sort of university, let's say, or a career from leaving school? I think the second option is becoming a little bit more attractive, isn't it? Because it's expensive to go to university and so on. And the sort of jobs in the industry are changing as well. So I think more broadly, I think it's a good thing. And I think it's free apprenticeships for those under 25. Yeah. But again, there's detail here. I think it's about SMEs, and what SME means is important. But I think it's a good step and an important one.
Yeah, I guess in the franchised dealer world, there's quite a lot of apprenticeship opportunities, right? And how kind of, I know also in the NFDA proposal, you made some proposals about apprenticeships.
Yeah.
It'd be really interesting to kind of talk about what those proposals were. Have they been fulfilled within this budget? Is there a bit further that we need to go from a dealership point of view?
Yeah, so I think one thing we always lobbied for was like more flexibility with the levy. So like it was specifically only for like, they have to be certain length of courses and something like that. I don't think that was this budget, but there are announcements, I think, that they're making them shorter, I think to like maybe 8 months or something like that. We also wanted more flexibility on what the training could be used for. So like a lot of manufacturers provide their own training, but the levy didn't cover that.
Okay.
So that was an issue as well. There was also, I think, a lot of confusion for businesses having access to funds and how do they go through the process of applying. There was a clawback cap as well. So if you didn't use the funds within like 2 years, the Treasury takes it back. I actually think they quite like that because it's a little pot of money that they can rely on sometimes. So there's still lots of unanswered questions, I think, around that. I know the formation of Skills England, which is supposed to oversee this, is still relatively new. We're a little confused now in terms of like apprenticeships has been moved to the DWP under their authority, but then like post-16 education is still with the Department for Education. So I don't think the departments are very good at talking to each other sometimes. So that's a little bit of a concern for us. They're supposed to be bringing in these new V levels, which adds more confusion. Speaking to a lot of members, they kind of already do what V levels are going to offer. So yeah, there's a lot to go through that's been announced. Not necessarily specifically related to the budget, so apologies, but
No, I think it's really interesting to talk about kind of the wider effect on the industry. And I guess my next question is, obviously those were the points within your policy document, but what are you seeing on kind of like an on the ground level in dealerships? Are we having, you know, quite a big uptake of apprenticeships in dealerships, and kind of at that base skill level?
Kind of, like there's still vacancies, and we have like our own thing to try and promote this. One of the main issues going forward will be, it's not just about like hiring these apprentices now, it's also like, for a lot of people, completely reskilling if you're working on an electric car.
Yeah, 100%.
It's almost
Touched
like,
on that in a couple of episodes.
right,
Yeah.
it's almost like you need the skills of an electrician almost. You're not really, cars become way more digitalized, so they're kind of, you know, slowly getting used to that, but it's not really a motor anymore, it's more of a battery, and yeah, that kind of affects bottom up, like the whole thing really. So yeah, there's still quite a lot of vacancies. A lot, once the levy is functioning properly, hopefully that will pick up. But I think for the industry, or maybe this is just for dealers, like you can get paid quite well doing a job there. I think our issue was getting that message to the right people at the right time, maybe.
Yeah.
So, you know, by the time that someone's come out of university, it's not that it's too late, but it's like, I think the best people to be here are probably around 16, 17. We have a big issue with them, like English and maths requirements. You know, a lot of the times, yeah, you might not be so good at English and maths, but you might be very good with your hands, technician, electrician. Why do you necessarily need these skills? I'm not quite sure, but so the only thing that I think they announced was, oh, there's going to be more like help for them to pass these exams. It's like, well, it'd be better if you kind of just got rid of that, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess if you know, if you are going to start to get rid of English, maths requirements for these apprenticeships, what we also need to be making sure is that the apprenticeships are actually fit for where the industry is going, not just where we are today with you know, a mostly mechanical fleet.
That's right.
Yeah, we have spoken in length on our podcast about the changing skills needed to service these EVs, and we're going to cover AI in the future, and that you know, it's such a changing industry, and we really are experiencing a huge kind of shift in how these vehicles are manufactured and the technology in them. So I think apprenticeships is actually a really huge focus in how we kind of train people up to really service these vehicles.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting point. I guess, you know, with this budget as a whole, and we've talked about it's a bit of a mixed bag, some good policies, some less good for retailers, fleet, OEMs, you know, the consumer. How do you think the automotive industry can kind of rally together to kind of, you know, tackle the pressure that the budget has put on all of those different segments? How do you think that we can best kind of work together to tackle that, Furrukh?
I mean, I think collaboration is probably the key point.
Yeah.
You know, dealer groups, OEMs, the fleet co's, industry bodies, NFDA, SMMT, for example. I think more lobbying is probably the key point for me.
Yeah.
Let's see what that does for, say, next year's budget. Could we do some? Could we make some progress there? So I'd probably say that's the key thing. I think you touched on the point about communication as well, and working together. How are we going to make this, you know, pay per mile change work, and so on and so forth. So I think they're probably the 2 points I would probably call out.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm in agreement, to be fair. Collaboration. I've only really been in this industry for about 3 years, but where I've seen government policy changes, usually when the industry is kind of on the same page about a thing.
Yeah.
We lobbied quite a lot for a direct incentive. I know lots of other trade associations and other companies did as well. I think we all kind of wanted different ones, but that's the only time I've seen that, oh, actually, if everyone's working together, you can get your message across to the government that the industry feels this way about a certain thing. They do listen. Yeah,
that's a really great point, Zach. And I think, you know, as we're changing and shifting as an industry, we really do have to come together. OEMs, fleets, consumers, you know, dealerships. We really have to kind of band together and really communicate what it is that we're needing in this shifting landscape. And that's a really great point to kind of end on. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It's been a really interesting episode about the budget. And
Certainly has been, yeah. Shed some light, hopefully,
yes,
to the audience on some of the finer details of what was discussed.
So thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks. Thanks very much for joining us on this episode of the Talk Auto podcast. Feel free to grab our email address from the show notes if you wanted to reach out to potentially star in an episode or just highlight some topics that you'd like us to discuss.
And as always, you can follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and you can catch us on YouTube at Cox Automotive YouTube channel. Remember to like, follow and subscribe, and we will see you next month for a very exciting episode on AI. See you then.